good to see everybody here again. This is an exciting day. A sad day because it's the last day we're together, but also an exciting day because this is the day when what you have been learning and experiencing up until this point, it all culminates, and the chance that you have to share your learning with other people. So you're going through a process right now similar to what the students in the Montessori program go through, where you get those initial lessons that pique your interest and curiosity, give you a knowledge base, and then you work independently and collaboratively with your peers, and then you share that work with everybody in order to sort of crystallize and solidify that new knowledge in your mind and to teach others what you have learned. So today is the day when all of that culminates, and I'm really, really looking forward to hearing all of your presentations and just seeing what you have come up with, because I've heard a lot of really great ideas so far and heard a lot of really interesting conversations yesterday as all of you were working together on your projects. So it's going to be a good day. Before you head off and complete your project work in preparation for your presentations today, I do want to talk to you a little bit about the 3-period lesson. As I said yesterday, I thought maybe it would be helpful to just go into a little bit more detail about this concept. Maybe this will be helpful for you in creating this document that you're creating for this project that you're making, so that you could format it in a 3-period lesson format. It'll help you organize the information, hopefully. So I would like to talk to you for a little bit about this. The 3-period lesson, of course, you're experiencing it right now. You're in the 2nd period of this work. I want to go over with you some of the just major characteristics of the 3-period lesson format. This is a concept that is a Montessori concept. Place-based education that we've been focusing on is not necessarily an official Montessori concept. It definitely is inspired by Montessori and feeds into what Montessori advocated. But the 3-period lesson is something that Montessori directly taught and advocated. And it's a cycle for learning. That word period could easily be changed out for the word cycle. It's a cycle of a learning process. And there are 3 stages in it. And the benefit to using this cycle of a process for learning is that it really keeps the focus of the work on the child. The 3-period lesson reminds us that the work of the child is not to sit and listen to a teacher for too long. That the work of learning needs to come from them, that they need to discover on their own. So the structure of this cycle, this 3-period lesson, goes like this. The first period is when there are lessons by the teacher. And I'm going to go into characteristics of each one of these periods as well. But this is just the overview. The 2nd period is the work of the student. That's when they're off doing their independent work. The 3rd period is the sharing and the presentation. So I think everybody has that down for the most part. Pretty simple structure. But let's talk a little bit about the major principles that are at play in the 3-period lesson, and then we'll look at the characteristics of each of those 3 periods. These are some principles that apply to the 3-period lesson that are very important, and these are what make the 3-period lesson so effective. A 3-period lesson will always have a balance between individual contribution and collective learning. So this cycle of learning, it gives each student a chance to explore something on their own, individually, but contribute to a collective whole. It gives them a purpose to their learning. They can feel like they're contributing to something more than just learning for themselves. They're helping other people learn as well. So that's important to keep in mind. And the second point here is basically just expounding on the same thing. It's the presentations and the sharing that students learn from one another. That third period is important for that reason. Another important principle are long second period work times. This is very important. Montessori talked about the importance of this. She advocated for 3-hour work cycles at a time. We don't always get that lucky to have that much time. But she felt that time was very important for students to have that time to be able to go out to discover, to experiment, to find their interest, to truly explore a topic. They need time to do that. So you want to have these second period work times that are as long as possible. You may feel that even here you have a lot of second period work time to work on your projects between yesterday and this morning, but that's very purposeful. You are the student right now, and you're experiencing what it means to have that much time to perfect your work. Another principle of the 3-period lesson is that the teacher is a resource for the student, not the provider of all knowledge. One way that we put that in the United States is we say the teacher is the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. I don't know if you have that saying here or not. But the teacher is really meant to consider themselves as just one of the resources in the prepared environment. We are a part of the prepared environment for the student, and we are one resource. Yes, we can provide little lessons for them to spark their curiosity, provide some basic foundational knowledge, but we need to consider ourselves a resource. We're always observing, and we're always there, ready to help them when they ask for it, ready to guide them. Another principle is that the teacher observes and guides when necessary. And I put this here purposefully to say when necessary. This is one of the hardest parts for a teacher. Sometimes it can be really hard when you're observing students do their work and they're not quite going in the direction that you want them to go in, or that you think they should go in, or they're not quite getting the information that you think that they should be getting. But sometimes it's best to step back, to be there and to observe, but give them time and give them room to discover on their own before stepping in. Try to wait for them to come to you when they need more information and more help. It's so hard, but try to wait. Because when they, and the reason for this, and maybe you even can apply this to your own self, when a child discovers information on their own, they remember it better. There's something about that discovery that makes them excited about having discovered something that to them is entirely new. There's a different feeling about learning that way than there is about being told facts by an adult. And so they'll remember it better. And so we want to give them the room to do that. The 3-period lesson allows for that, and it reminds us to allow for that. We want to guide students to discovery of knowledge. Now let's talk about some key characteristics of each of these 3 periods, each of these stages of a cycle of learning. The first period, there's something that I would like to differentiate with you when it comes to talking about the 3-period lesson? And is it okay to draw on the whiteboard? Yeah. It's okay, thank you. I'm going to borrow a graphic. I hope everybody can see this. I'll move away so you can see it better. I'm going to borrow a graphic from Lori Ewert Crocker from Hershey Montessori. She uses this graphic to help people understand this concept of the 3-period lesson. Because in one sense, when you're talking about a unit of study, you have one main 1st-period lesson that lays the foundation for the whole project or unit of study that they are about to embark on. There's that one main 1st-period lesson that sets the stage. And then you have the long 2nd-period work time, which might last for multiple weeks that they're in the 2nd period. And then you have that one 3rd-period session at the end that concludes their work, where they present and they share their work with one another. So you have, let's say you have a 3-week humanities project going on. There's one 1st period, one huge 2nd period time frame, and one 3rd period that might span those 3 weeks. But within this, there are smaller 3-period lessons happening all the time. Oops, that should be a 1. So when we're talking about the 1st period, there are 2 different kinds of 1st-period lessons we're really talking about. There's that big one that really launches everything, and then there are all those small little 1st-period lessons that you give throughout. Even one-on-one with students. Even when they're in their 2nd period work, there are little 1st-period lessons coming from the guide. And that's when they come to you, for example, and they say, I cannot find any information on the properties of water. I'm just really having a difficult time finding it. Can you please help me? And that's when the teacher steps in, and here comes another little mini 1st-period lesson. Let's talk about how to find information that you need. Let's talk about what you do when you can't find it. And it's a little 1st-period lesson. So there's always this main 1st-period lesson and then frequent smaller ones throughout the cycle. A 1st-period lesson, when you're talking about that main one, it always initiates the theme or the challenge of the project that they are embarking on. It gives students the big picture of what they're starting. And it connects them to the big picture in some way. You want to try to find that connection that they can make through empathy with the big picture. You want to tell them how it applies to them in some way, so that they can feel it and they can own it. Sometimes that can be one of the biggest challenges of creating that big 1st-period lesson, is really figuring out what is it about this theme, about this topic, that is going to grab them and inspire them to do their best work. But you want to try to find it. 1st-period lessons also provide the key vocabulary. That's an important part of just learning language as you grow. You need to understand the vocabulary that's related to all of the different topics and themes that you are exploring as a child. You're building your vocabulary base. It builds the intellect. It will help them in the 3rd period to know the right language to use when they're sharing. So you want to provide that to them. You want to provide them with key questions. Give them questions to ask that can inspire them to come up with more questions on their own, so that they can pursue the answers. They know what kind of answers that they're trying to pursue. A 1st-period lesson, especially that main 1st-period lesson that launches a new project, it is oftentimes sensorial or experiential in some way. And you can go about this in a multitude of different ways. I'm trying to think of just an example off the top of my head, actually, but I remember when I was starting one humanities unit of study, we were going to be studying, we were starting off the year, we were going to study the Americas before Christopher Columbus, so pre-Columbian Americas. I had a difficult time thinking about how to make this experiential to launch it off. But what I decided to do was, it was a beautiful day outside that day. And so I got some sidewalk chalk. I don't know if you use that here, but a great big blocky, colorful chalk. And we went outside, and there's this long, sort of curvy sidewalk that leads to one of our buildings in the middle school campus. And I gave each of them a different time period of world history. And just to start things off, they created a timeline on the sidewalk that you could walk along of human history. And then I used that timeline that they created to start teaching them where the Americas fit into the history of the world. And so it just was a way to help make that first period lesson a little more experiential for them. They became a part of it by creating some of the visuals that I was using to illustrate the lesson. So there are a multitude of ways to make a lesson experiential, but that's just one example. A first period lesson, you always want to spark curiosity the best that you can. Make them curious. Talk about the mysteries related to the topic they're exploring. Tell them what you don't know. That's hard for a teacher sometimes, right? To say what you don't know. But they appreciate it, and that sometimes will spark their curiosity because they'll think, well, why doesn't my teacher know? Sometimes simple things like that can spark curiosity. A first period lesson always sets the stage and nothing more. So I keep on hitting this point over and over again in different ways. It keeps coming up, but it's just to emphasize you want to set the stage for them. You want to give them the big picture, but you want to allow room for discovery. You don't want to give them all the details. One thing that Maria Montessori wrote that has always stuck with me since training, she said, to teach details is to bring confusion for the adolescent. Details confuse. They do not enlighten. Not the adolescent brain. And for that reason, we try our best to keep first period lessons at about 10 to 20 minutes long. Now, those main first period lessons that launch a whole new project, those often are longer because they're experiential. Because students might be creating a timeline on a sidewalk, or they might be cooking some food together. Those can be longer, but those shorter first period lessons that come throughout a whole learning cycle, those tend to be 10 to 20 minutes. You keep them short, and then you let the student get back to work. Because you just want it to be enough to set the stage, to spark their curiosity, to provide key vocabulary. It's just enough to keep them going, and keep them going on their own as much as possible. The second period. This is the period that you are about to go back into, the period of independent work. Here are some important characteristics to keep in mind as you prepare an environment for your students in which they can really thrive in their second period work. Inquiry. Keep asking them questions. Keep listening to their questions. Don't always answer their questions. Keep inquiry alive. Keep questions alive. Sometimes they're more important than the answers. The second period is a time for dialogue, for seminars, for discussion. I remember yesterday afternoon when all of you went off into your groups. I walked around, Kelly and I walked around, and what I was expecting to see from adults was that you would all be kind of quietly working on your own, in your spaces, on your projects, but instead, all the groups had gotten together and began discussion. You were discussing, you were having dialogue. Adolescents do the same thing, constantly. Even when they're working on their own individual projects and they're not doing group projects, they cannot stand to work alone. They're always talking through their work. But it's terrific because the whole time they're sharing what they're learning, they're sharing their questions, they're helping each other. It's beautiful. That's when the teacher, and that's how the teacher can step back and observe and just watch them teach each other and help each other. It's exactly what all of you were doing yesterday afternoon. It's exactly what happens in middle school. And sometimes part of second period work is when the teacher might pull all of the students together and give them a reading that's based on what they're studying, something that's meant to really make them think. Maybe a nice deep intellectual reading. It can even be very short. It can even be something like a political cartoon that they have to analyze. But have a seminar. Pull them together and have a formal seminar. That can be part of the second period. They sit in a circle. The teacher steps outside of the circle. They start asking each other questions about what they just read or studied. And it just gives them a formal setting in which to have dialogue. And it's good for them to go between having the formal setting where they have to really focus on their language and using elevated vocabulary, and they have to focus on their posture and their poise, to go back and forth between that and those conversations they just have around the table as they're working. But that's an important part of the second period as well, and even just discussions that are less formal. The second period is often when they're mostly working on their individual research and exploration of the topic. And I wanted to point out the role of choice, the importance of choice in this. When you roll out a new unit of study, you give that big first period lesson, you spark their curiosity. At that point, as much as possible, you want them to have choice of where they take it. It's always better to do that than to assign them their specific topics. Choice is important for children and adolescents because it motivates them. When they can pursue something that they personally feel more interested in, of course that's going to be more motivating. Adults are no different. We want to pursue things that we're interested in. That's just natural, that's just life. They want that too. They're going to do better work if they choose it. Choosing their own topics, choosing their own work, choosing how they share their work, that gives them a unique identity in the group. It makes them feel as if they are providing something unique. They're contributing something unique to the larger group. And to the project as a whole. And it also just allows them, all of our students are interested in different things, and just giving them choice allows them to pursue those interests. And you know what, for the adolescent, their interests change constantly. You know, they might be interested in fantasy literature one week, and the next week that's old news to them. They've moved on. But giving them the opportunity to explore those interests is important for them because they should explore those interests. This is an age for them to really find what they're passionate about. So they need the freedom to do that. So that's the power of choice. So when it comes to their research, their projects, as much as possible give them choice for that. And then of course just going back to the long periods of work time, 2 to 3 hours at a time is ideal. They need time to work and to do all of this. The role of the adult in the second period is tricky because we want to intercede in their work all the time. And I think I've already made this point, but just to reiterate this last one, the role of the adult during the second period is to ask questions, ask for summaries of what they're learning, occasionally ask for explanations. Can you explain this to me? I see that you're writing this down. Can you explain what that means? Even if you know what that means, ask them to explain it. It builds their language skills. It builds their knowledge. Sometimes it's okay to redirect. A teacher needs to use their intuition on whether or not to do this or whether or not to let them keep going. But if you see them going too far off course, it is okay to redirect sometimes. Second period is time to do that. And the adults should be available to give feedback throughout the second period too. They need feedback. They need to know how they're doing. Okay. Key characteristics of the third period, what you'll be experiencing this afternoon. Student accountability for their learning is a key aspect of the third period lesson. This is where students truly need to be held accountable for what they learned. The third period is often a replacement for the test. A test makes you accountable for your learning, right? It's the same thing with the third period. It's just a different way to be held accountable. It's a different way to show your learning. It's a much deeper, more personal way to show your learning than taking a test. But yes, they are accountable. Smaller third period lessons occur daily. So there's a big third period at the end of a project where everybody really shares out like you're going to be doing this afternoon. But throughout the whole cycle of a project or a unit of study, just like there are a lot of mini little first period lessons you give throughout as needed, there are also little moments of sharing. And sometimes a little mini third period might be simply when you ask a student to explain or to catch you up with where they are at in their research. And they have to take 2 minutes of their time to explain to you what they've learned so far and where they're going with it. That's a little third period, they're sharing. So that happens consistently, and you want that to keep happening consistently. Find those opportunities to have those little mini third period moments where they need to share something. I often, when I'm running a humanities project, oftentimes at the very end of the day, after they've been working for 2 hours, I'll bring them all back before it's time to go home. I'll bring them back in the afternoon for just 10 minutes, and they'll sit in a circle and we'll just go around the room and they'll say one thing they learned today that really stood out to them. And sometimes that's enough, just having those consistent little third period moments like that. It keeps them sharing. So a key characteristic of a third period is that it concludes in a big presentation. I think you know that already. But also that there's collective learning involved in this. And that means that students are informing one another. They're learning collectively, not just isolated on their own. And that's one of the real benefits of doing a cycle of learning this way instead of concluding it with a test. With a test, there's no real sharing. You're just taking a test. You're just letting a teacher know if you learned the information that they gave you. With the third period, it's about collective learning. They're learning together. They're all sharing their information. At the end, the students end up becoming the teacher. Their presentations at the end up being the lessons that you wish you could be giving the whole way through. It's just that you're helping guide them to give the lessons that as a teacher, you think that they should get. And they're learning collectively. Another characteristic is that learning can really be shared in a variety of ways. So remember that that's part of the importance of choice. As much as possible, students shouldn't just have choice in what they pursue and what they research. Also give them choice as much as possible on how they share that with everybody. And there are different ways to do it. I often have them do it in multiple different ways. I'll often have them do a written third period work, an essay or a short story or some poems. But I'll also have them do something creative. They just did this for Kelly recently. They were able to come up with any creative way of expressing what they learned about a certain immigrant group in the US, and they thrived in that. They cooked for each other, they sang for each other. It was beautiful. And they owned it because they were able to choose it. But don't forget, especially for the main conclusionary third period lesson, every voice should be heard. Make sure that every student shares. Don't let any slip through the cracks. Don't let any say, I'm too shy to share my work with others. They all need to have a voice in what they're doing. They all need to share to that, they need to add to that collective learning experience. So when you have very shy students who struggle with this, then maybe it's a matter of just sitting down and trying to come up with ideas with them on ways that they can share, that they feel more comfortable with. And then maybe next time they do it a different way, and the next time they do it a different way. And you coach them through the process of not being afraid to be in front of people and to share what they've learned. But every voice needs to be heard. So, in practical terms, that might mean that a 3-period lesson all leads to the student writing an essay, the student doing a creative project about their learning, and the student doing an oral presentation in front of the class, a formal presentation with a PowerPoint behind them, or a display board that they've made. Or it might mean they're doing a dramatic performance that tells the story of what they learned. But a third period usually isn't just one thing. It's usually multiple modes of sharing. And they're learning how to share information in many different ways. One more point about the 3-period lesson is the importance of documentation, and this is just a very practical tip for teachers. Documentation is not something that Maria Montessori really talked about so much with the 3-period lesson. This is just a practical tip from one teacher to another. Well, not all of you are teachers, but you know. You're creating a planning document of sorts for this project that you're doing. It's important to have a planning document. It's important to have that document where you've collected all of your ideas, all of your thoughts. Potential readings you could have them do, potential seminars, potential research topics. There is the summary document that can be made after a project has been completed. I know some of you are writing, and I'm going to come back to this slide so you can finish writing, but I was going to show you what a summary document looks like. I made a template just for myself for both planning documents and summary documents that I basically just fill in. But this is what a summary document can look like. This happens after a particular project is over. It records the dates in which the work spanned. It records all of the students involved in the collective learning process. You track the actual first period lessons and second period discussions that took place throughout. You keep track of it. Because I guarantee you, if you're teaching Montessori, in your planning document, you might plan to give all of these beautiful mini first period lessons, and you might plan all of these really cool second period things that you can do, but you're not going to get to all of them. There's an organic quality to the 3-period lesson that sometimes you just have to follow the child. And sometimes the lessons you planned are not the ones they need. and you realize that in the moment. And so it's nice to have a summary document that you can go back to and revisit what you did the last time with students, what they needed. You record collaborative projects and activities and what they actually did. This one happens to be for that one humanities project I mentioned where we made the sidewalk chalk timeline of human history, a 100-foot long timeline. So I recorded that. That was not something I put in my planning document. That was a very last-minute addition. So that goes to show you the organic nature of these types of experiences. But a summary document keeps track of that. I keep track of what readings that I give them to do as background readings. These are often little homework assignments just to keep them learning. Even when they go home, read a chapter of this, read this article. Sometimes it's poetry. I had them read a poem by Rudyard Kipling here. All of these things. I track when we go off campus to do field studies, to incorporate place-based learning. I record it, and the skills that I believe that they gained from this work. That can be helpful for many reasons. One way that it's helpful is for parent education. Sometimes it's good to, keep parents informed on what you're doing with their children. And a summary document helps you to do that. Another piece of important documentation after a 3-period lesson, after a whole project, is a narrative evaluation of student engagement and work. This is what they receive in place of normally just getting a grade on a test. Instead of just receiving that grade, you might want to give them a whole narrative assessment or evaluation of their work that talks to them about their engagement, about their concept mastery, about their time management and how they managed their time and their project work. This is important for adolescents. In adolescence, they're learning how to manage their time, and they struggle with it. They definitely struggle with it, but it's a skill that they need. And just overall skill mastery. So I do have an example of what one of these documents looks like as well. I'll bring that up here. This is just an example of one evaluation document I've used for a humanities project. This is one I created for a humanities project called Worldviews, which is where the students basically studied world religions and major philosophies throughout history. And notice that I've created, it's maybe a little difficult to read, but I talk about their overall engagement and achievement, and I have followed instructions. There are just different objectives there, basically. That they responsibly managed their time, they used their time for focused work, they handled independence responsibly, they actively participated in discussions, they used grace and courtesy and community ethics. Then I talked about their research, the craftsmanship, their bibliography, the depth and relevance of information. And notice in this evaluation, I'm not giving them any letter grades or percentages. There's simply a box for a check mark. They did this. And then there's a big area for comments. This is the narrative part. This is where you actually write to them and give them a message about how they're doing. What they did great and where they could continue to work. So that is what a narrative evaluation can look like. But that's part of the important feedback that they need throughout a 3-period lesson. Bless you. Okay. I don't know what lights I want on. This is taking me a second. making decisions yet at this point. Okay. Well, thank you for everybody involved in making that video. That was really special. I'm excited to get the link for that so that I can show some people at home that I think will enjoy seeing that as well. I do want to give some closing remarks. I knew I was going to have to give some sort of conclusion to this workshop at the end here. And honestly, when I was back home and getting prepared for all of this, I really didn't know what conclusion I would want to give. I kept on trying to come up with ideas of what I could do, or do I just kind of wrap up the main points again? And I just couldn't think of what to do, so I decided to just wait until I was here and wait until I met all of you and experienced this work with you, and that I would just come up with a conclusion here based on my experiences with you and based on what I feel like I'm walking away with here today. So it's not a long conclusion, but it is just a statement. And I'm going to go ahead and just read it because I haven't memorized it. But I woke up this morning and I wrote this, and so this is sort of the truth that I'm walking away with, and it's the truth that I hope that you are walking away with. And I'll just go ahead and read it. I believe education is important. It is necessary and it is powerful. Education can lose its power when societies and communities are using education to prepare their children to compete in a globalized world by means of isolating them from that world in rooms where they are lined up and required through mental activities that are contrary to their natural workings of their minds to learn and memorize a canon of knowledge. Knowledge that a committee of adults far removed from them decided they should learn. Training them to be competitive in a global economy by largely using instructional methods that were developed during the Industrial Revolution, which even then were specifically calculated to train children for lives of subordination and repetition in factories and mines. This traditional notion of instruction was not designed to nurture the sensorial explorers of the first plane. It was not designed to nurture the imagination of the child. It was not designed to respond to the need of the adolescent to develop moral principles and to discover their potential as members of society when they are transitioning into adulthood. It was made to silence those aspects of our shared humanity. The old education can be reduced to numbers, spreadsheets, percentages, and scores. It is manageable. It is predictable. It is controllable. The new education that this world desperately needs cannot be reduced to data. Education is not a means to a high-paying job or a society of workers that know how to memorize data but do not have the heart or imagination or drive to use that knowledge for the good of mankind. We are more than profit seekers. Humans are more than makers and consumers of mass-produced goods. We are stewards of a beautiful planet. We are stewards of one another. We are mothers and fathers and friends and lovers and artists and poets and architects of places that themselves are physical manifestations of poetry that can bring a group of teenagers to complete silence. And we need to recognize that education is a means to these aspects of life as well. Life is noble and wonderful and mysterious. It cannot be reduced to numbers, scores, and spreadsheets. The new education, as Montessori put it, should be an aid to life. I believe that each of you are here this weekend because you feel in your spirit that these things are true. You feel propelled toward finding ways to make education more meaningful and purposeful in the lives of the young people that you serve. You feel the need to serve the child rather than the curriculum. Whether you are a parent, a teacher, an administrator, a social worker, a consultant, a coach at the local YMCA, you are here on a holiday weekend because you feel the calling of a new education. A new way to guide and help the next generation to grow into moral and just citizens of a changing world. An education that is an aid to life. You already feel in your heart the truth that is in so much of Dr. Montessori's words. And I'm going to read some of her words right now. The child is both a hope and a promise for mankind. The child is capable of developing and giving us tangible proof of the possibility of a better humanity. A great social mission that will ensure the child justice, harmony, and love remains to be accomplished. And this great task must be the work of education. For this is the only way to build a new world and to bring peace. It is absolutely certain that the secret of future human power lies hidden within humanity as it develops, within young people. My hope as we leave you here today is that you have seen the power of place as a means of creating transformative learning experiences for young people. That you have seen the potential of tapping into the human connections to the spirit of places. That place itself can be a teacher that speaks to the very heart and soul of the student. That connects them to life, to nature, to the human story, to one another, to distant ancestors of the past, to both the mysteries and to our scientific understanding of the universe and our role in it. I hope that you have seen that while place-based education is not itself an official aspect of Montessori pedagogy, Dr. Montessori and her reformist contemporaries spoke and wrote constantly about the importance of place in learning and in human development. We have worked this weekend to simply provide some practical frameworks to the wisdom that they shared so long ago. It is my hope, too, that you leave here today feeling as I do, that this place, this university, this building, this room, now has been given that mysterious spirit of place that we can feel but can hardly explain. That your individual and social experiences here have merged with this physical environment and formed in your heart, mind, and soul a connection that will forever be a piece of who you are. I leave here with that feeling. So thank you to all of you for being here with us and for being a part of this and for being such wonderful students and colleagues. And thank you to Y2, to the Montessori Program for Global Impact, to everybody here who was so hospitable. You are the most incredibly hospitable people that I think we have ever met. And I just want to thank you for all that you have done to make us feel comfortable, to make us feel welcome and appreciated. So thank you, and that is my send-off. I really appreciate all of it. Good luck.